everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, photographers meet here to connect, inspire, and create. And if you'd like to join us live, you'll find the schedule for upcoming sessions on my website at lindanickell.com. Every week, my guests share their photography tips, the stories behind their images, and they inspire us to try something new. Tonight's guest is Jose Madrigal. Madrigal. Jose is a macro photographer who has mastered the art of photographing the tiny world of pollinators. His work has been published and recognized internationally. In tonight's presentation, Enter the Dragonfly. Jose will talk about his gear, but more importantly, his techniques for photographing fast-flying dragonflies and damselflies. He'll explain how he finds the best subjects and plans his approach for extreme close-ups, beautiful environmental compositions, and amazing aerial shots. If you're on Instagram, you can find him at jmad_images, and you can connect with him through his website, jmadimages.com. Welcome back to the Happiness Hour, Jose.
Well, thank you for having me again. All right. Is everybody seeing the screen?
Yeah, and I wish I had that shot.
You know what's funny? This is actually one of the very first photos that I captured of a dragonfly. I had just gotten my 100 to 400 lens and I went out to test it out. And it's ended up being one of my favorites of all time and one of the favorites of people that, have, as I told you, I do some art shows and things like that. And it's been one of my more popular images. There's just something about it, the composition, the color, the way the colors complement each other, and it just has a real, uh, I guess that it factor, just a certain feeling that you don't know really how to describe. So it's pretty cool, and I'm definitely glad that it's mine. Um, all right, a little bit about myself. I got this picture last year taken. I've always wanted a picture like this of me actually in the field taking pictures of bugs because that's how I do it. I have people all the time ask me if I shoot handheld or if I use a tripod, or they imagine that I probably set up a tripod and sit by a flower for a long time, and I'm like, nope, I'm holding the camera in my hands and I'm walking around from flower to flower because as I'll talk about even with the odonates, that I'm looking for certain behavior, and a tripod is basically just going to tie me down. I want to be able to be free to move on to a different subject that's giving me more of the type of behavior that I'm looking for. Okay, and so as you can see there, I've been a photographer since about 2017, although I've been a lifelong artist in a variety of things, drawing, playing music. I do think that photography is probably my most pure art form because it's the one where I've been the least concerned about people being impressed with me. I want them impressed with my work. And so it's been a neat process in discovering myself as an artist through this medium. And I tell people as well at art shows that I don't really consider myself a photographer. I consider myself an artist who uses the camera to create his art. And the difference is subtle, but it's basically the difference of that I would not want to get hired to do a job like to be an event photographer, or if I worked for a magazine, it would need to be doing nature photography. I wouldn't just want to go work for somebody, and I wouldn't want to be an expert on the camera or on photography. I'm there's certain things that I want to be able to photograph, and because of the skill level that it's required to be able to do that, I've acquired some skills that are definitely unique and have helped me to be able to teach these kind of workshops and things like that, where people are like, "How in the world are you photographing insects in flight?" And so I've always, in addition to being a lifelong artist, I've been a lifelong teacher of sorts. I love helping people. I love teaching. I love sharing. And so, um, like Linda was saying a little earlier, any questions that you guys have, please feel free to ask me. You can email me, you can message me on social media. I do spend a little more time on Facebook these days than on Instagram, although overall I'm just not on social media as much as I used to be. So emailing is probably the surest way to get a response within 24 hours. But if you don't want to email me, definitely message me and I'll get back to you on the social media within a couple of days. And and yeah, so without any further ado, let me see if I can. What's going on here? I think by moving some things around, I disabled my uh, I have a little controller here today. And so anyway, all right. So the first tip that I always try to teach people about the subjects that I shoot, whether it's pollinators or whether it's dragonflies, whatever it is. And even like I was telling Linda, I really enjoy landscape photography as well. And I've almost kind of rediscovered that within the past year. I've been doing a lot more landscape photography and spending a little bit more time traveling and doing that. And it's kind of a little bit of reigniting that artistic flame in that. And studying the subject is important with any type of photography, but especially with nature photography. If you wanted to try to photograph a mountain lion, you wouldn't just go out into a random field and hope to run into a mountain lion, and it seems obvious when you state it like that, but a lot of times people do that with pollinators or with dragonflies. They just want to go out and try to take a picture, and they just start snapping without paying attention to their behavior and without thinking about what they're doing. And it's really important you don't need to become an entomologist. But you do need to spend a little bit of time researching. What you guys are doing right now is studying the subject. You're here to learn a little bit about the things that I've learned over the years. And so it's important to do things like that, but then also spend some time in the field watching, observing, getting to know, because the dragonflies that I shoot in my part of Texas may not be the same dragonflies that are there in your part of Texas. And so you're going to have to get to know their behaviors. And I've also noticed certain species act a certain way in my area and then seem to act a different way in other areas. There's some species that have always been kind of my go-to for in flight that I can always count on at certain times of day and things like that in my region. And then I went out to West Texas, and it was another species that was actually one of the easier ones to photograph in flight. So getting to know the behaviors that I'm going to teach you here is going to help you then just get out there and start watching for it. And so, all right, let me see if this controller is working now. Yes, perfect. All right. So one of the first things that I talk to people about is to give thought to the time of day that you're going out at. If you get out early in the morning before any of the insects have really started becoming active. A little before dawn is early enough. If sun up is at 7 a.m., I try to get out there maybe about 6:15, 6:20, just as you're starting to see a little bit of light. And you will need to take an external light source, but you can typically find them before they've gotten active. If it's a little bit cooler, that's going to help. Here in Texas, by around this time, it's already starting to be pretty warm in the mornings. But like this weekend, we're going to have some mornings in the 60s. And if you're in northern Texas, you might even have some 50s. So try to take advantage of that if you're in an area where it's going to be in the 50s, particularly. They don't really like to move too much in that cool of temperatures. And so you have opportunities to take pictures kind of like this one where I shot this one at about 6:30 in the morning. The dragonfly had dewdrops all over it, and so that's a really good way if you're looking to do some really close-up macro shots and to get some neat stuff like I said, like the dewdrops or whatever other activities they might be doing at these random hours. Mating behaviors, another thing that I look for. One of the big things, particularly for flight photography. This is true with both pollinators and with dragonflies. Um, Dragonflies are going to not all of them do this. This is what's called the mating wheel. They fly in a wheel, what's called this mating wheel position. They do always form that mating wheel. They just don't all fly while they're mating. Usually, most species that I've observed, they'll hook up and then they'll go land and perch somewhere and finish mating and then go and deposit the eggs in the pond. But there's a few species that will fly around like that, connected in the mating wheel, and they do tend to fly a little bit slower when they're flying like this. They'll slow down. In fact, when they first connect and kind of hover in place, you have to be pretty fast to catch that moment. And this was kind of that moment right after they connected. And as you can tell by the depth of field and the closeness, this is barely cropped. And I was shooting at 800 millimeters. So this was one of my proudest shots of the mating wheel in flight because it, like I said, it was extremely up close. I was probably about 4 feet away from them, and that's really hard to get handheld because it's like they're, it's like trying to balance a pencil on the end of your finger. Um, the next behavior that I look for is patrolling a territory. You're going to see this a lot with males, and the easiest time again is going to be in the mornings when they first start getting active. Those of you that have been to my workshops, Linda as well has been, you know that when they first start getting active, it's actually a little bit easier. They tend to be when there's only a few dragonflies out, they tend to be a little bit more, they take a little bit longer hovering and kind of checking the scene out and looking for a competitor. As more activity starts happening and the pond starts waking up, they get going faster and faster, and it starts becoming more and more challenging to capture them in flight. Um, so the big trick is, I hope you're catching on that it's really to be looking for them to be hovering versus uh, trying to catch them when they're zipping by super fast. Now, I do have some shots like that as well. There's some that seem to just never stop, and so I've definitely learned to track them as well. But that's definitely a more advanced technique, and I always recommend learning first to watch for that hover and start being able to photograph them when they're hovering. Because once you can do that, then you can kind of start tracking them a little bit and following them around and rapid firing as you're following them through a shot across the pond or something like that. These two right here, that's a pretty cool shot. I've managed to get probably a couple of dozen good captures of multiple dragonflies in focus in one shot. I've got more than that of multiple dragonflies in a photo, but to get more than one in the same in focus in the same focal plane, that's just kind of a roll of the dice. And so I love this one. These two in particular, these are called blue dashers, and one of the things that they'll do is they'll hover one above the other as they're flying around. They basically joust and they get into little fights, and but you'll see them hover right above the other one, and then the one underneath will fly up and like hit him. And what's interesting about that too is that so when they go to mate, this is something I don't have a picture of yet, but I'm definitely hoping this summer I get either some pictures or some video or both. When they're actually mate, when they find a female, and this is why it's such a difficult thing, is to catch that moment when they spot a female. They go hover above her if she's flying around, and she'll all of a sudden fly up like she's being sucked up in a tractor beam, and he grabs her, and then they go into the mating wheel and fly off, and they usually will perch. They'll hover for a little bit, but they tend to perch more, and so it's not too often that you can get a shot of them in an in-flight mating wheel. All right, and so those are the settings there for that shot. I'll try to remember on the next one to make sure to advance on real quickly so you guys can look at those settings while I'm talking. Returning to a perch, For macro shots, if you guys have been out trying to photograph dragonflies, you know that they're very skittish. They're notorious for just taking off as soon as you try approaching. And so this is a Halloween pennant, male, and this was one of my most difficult ones. In fact, I think the first season out trying to photograph dragonflies, I was never able to get an up close macro photo, just some distant ones with the telephoto lens, and I just assumed I wasn't going to be able to get it. Well, the next summer I said, you know what, I'm gonna do this, and so what I did was. I noticed that as I would approach, if I would stop, it would fly off, obviously, as I'm approaching. And then if I would come to a stop, it would eventually come back to that same perch. And so then I started, if I went to that perch a little too fast, it would go find another perch. And so what I started doing was approaching, taking a couple of steps while it was flying away and then stopping and letting it come back to the same perch. Did that multiple times over the course of maybe 10 minutes, which seems like an eternity when you're out there trying to get a picture. But it worked. I was able to get up close. And then the neat thing about dragonflies is that once they let you into that zone, that friendship zone, I guess, then you can take as many shots as you want. I got dozens of shots of him from, a few different angles, and even this really perfect frontal shot like that. And like I said, I just if I had given up like I had been feeling like I was going to need to the year prior, then I never would have gotten this incredible shot. But it's really goes back to that same point of studying the subject, paying attention to how do they act, and responding to that. Um, okay, I don't know why this isn't going, but all right. So tip number two. Is about planning your composition. Once you've figured out their behaviors, start thinking a little bit about the composition, start thinking about, do you want an environmental shot? Are you going to need to get down low to the ground? This one was in the grasses. Do you want something that shows where the dragonfly is just kind of part of the environment, or do you want something where, the dragonfly is the whole composition? For this one, it was a breezy day, and so and widow skimmers are definitely one as well that is notorious for being very skittish and very difficult to get up close to. And so this was again probably within the first year or two of me being out taking pictures of dragonflies. I think it was actually late of the first summer that I got this picture, and just really love this composition, the way the lines are, and I just like how it all works together there. Um, so if you don't want, instead of a compositional shot, you may want an extreme close-up like this. Again, for these, you're going to need to be very patient, approach slowly, taking your time, and take a couple of steps, pause a minute, wait for it to come back to the perch, take another couple of steps, and so if you want that extreme close up, you're going to have to get really close up and allow it to do that. Now, some cool things happen when you get up close. You're going to need to use flash. You're going to need to use a good diffuser, to really get good light. The nose, if you can tell on the tip of the forehead, right between the eyes there, it looks iridescent. And what's interesting is that in natural light, it just looks purple. But with the flash, it definitely took on the iridescence and glowed like that golden color, and you can see a little bit of the purple on the edges. But that's something that, like, when I photographed this dragonfly with natural light, this is a roseate skimmer female, I had never, and I never would have known without getting up close and getting this kind of shot. But this is another cool thing with the dragonflies. Like I said, once they let you up into that friendship zone, then they'll just kind of sit there, and some of them even start getting a little flirty, and as I say it, and coy. Some of them will. I've had one where it kept flying and hitting my shoulder, and then it'd go back to its perch. And then, it'd be turning its head, and, very similar with this one. She kept turning her head. She'd look up at me and sideways, and this was my favorite shot of her. Um, you may want to get a bird's eye view. This is actually shot from overhead. This is again another stubborn species, the carmine skimmer. But again, once you get into that friendship zone, you can be overhead, you can be on the side underneath, and they don't freak out anymore once they see that you're, a few inches away from them and you're not eating them. Um, oh, I will say, as far as the approach goes, approach from the front. They are very uh, I think they detect motion better than they detect light and color. And so as soon as they start to see movement, particularly lateral movement or side movement, they react to that very quickly. If you come in straight forward, just try to line yourself up straight from the front, take those couple of steps. They don't perceive you moving towards them quite as much if you're not doing any kind of lateral movement. Um, All right. The first picture, another thing to consider in composition is, what is your background going to be like? You may want it to be a colorful background, and if so, then you're most likely going to need to use natural light. Although there's some neat things that you can do combining flash with natural light, of course. This is what's referred to as open shade, where it's a bright sunny day, but it's under tree cover. And so the trees are providing natural diffusion for the light to the dragonfly, and then creating, as the sun is coming through the foliage in the background, it gives it that glow behind it, and so it worked really well. Dragonflies don't all that often perch on flowers, so if you see one on a flower, try to get a good shot of it. It's a pretty special shot, and not saying that they're aversive to it. It's just they do, in my experience, they tend to find a stick or a branch or something like that more so than an actual flower. But I do see them on flowers routinely. Like I said, just nowhere near as often as just on a stick or a branch. So definitely watch for those kind of opportunities, and do make sure to try to get a good composition of that if you see it. So instead of a bright, colorful background, you may want some kind of like a dark background. This one was definitely that kind of combination of natural light, although the natural light was fairly underexposed. Um, and so that's water behind it, and so that's why it's got that deep blue color. And then the reflections, you can see the bokeh balls that are up above it a little bit. Those were just some glistening spots on the water and just created a really, really nice composition for me there. Um, the clean background flight shot, that's one of my more well-known, the one of the things that I'm better known for in the types of photography. I consider this a true, like just a portrait of a pollinator or of a dragonfly, when it's just a clean minimal shot of the subject in flight. Damselflies, particularly certain species. One is familiar bluet, and in the fall, you'll find them in droves, kind of hovering as they're. I think that's kind of like a mating season for them, and they start doing a lot of hovering around each other and vying for the attention of females. And I feel like that the way that they hold their legs up, they almost kind of look like they're a yogi levitating. And so it's a pretty neat. It allows you to get a neat shot like that. For this one, I did actually have to get into the water. I was about waist deep in the water. And so that's another thing to keep in mind, to get some special shots. Sometimes you're gonna have to get a little bit dirty. But it's worth it. I did find a situation one time where there was a little stream that and I have noticed that it seems like that when the water is moving, that kind of elicits the hovering behavior above it. So if you see dragonflies or damselflies, I should say, that's what this is. If you see damselflies near a moving stream, around close to dusk, a little before, maybe an hour or two before sunset, watch for them, and you might see them in fairly large numbers, doing a lot of this kind of hovering and floating around and jockeying for space, for territories. Um, looking for a complementary background, as opposed to a clean background. There's still a pretty clean background, but instead of just using the water or the sky, trying to find some foliage behind the subject. This was in autumn. This was after the drought of 22. We had a drought in 2022 and then again in 2023. This was in the fall of 2022, and everything was just burnt and dry behind it, and so it created a natural golden hue back there, which I thought was a really nice complement to the turquoise color in the dragonfly's eyes. This is a thornbush dasher, is the name of the species here, and yeah, so like I said, look for opportunities. This required really getting low on the water, just a little above the water to get that right angle, and get the foliage behind it. All right, let me see if I can advance forward here. Um, Tip number 3 is choosing the right equipment for what you need. Um, if you've watched before, you know that I talk about, that having a camera with lots of megapixels is important if you're going to be shooting a lot of macro photography, because with small subjects, even when you have a macro lens, you're still going to need to crop. And so you're going to need to be able to have a lot of megapixels to work with so that when you crop down, you're still having a good quality image. Um, Now, the downside of lots of megapixels is that each pixel doesn't gather as much light, and so your cameras that handle low light better typically have less megapixels, and because the pixels get to be larger, they gather more light, and so they tend to do a better job with low light. And so just kind of finding that right balance is important for the type of photography that you like to do, or maybe having two cameras, having one as a backup that's a lower megapixel. A lot of times a lower megapixel camera is not going to be as expensive and might get you better results in low light if you're trying to do photography of really of anything, but particularly like these dragonflies. A lot of times when they tend to hover is in the evening, or for, like I had mentioned, first thing in the morning. And so having a camera that can handle low light is going to be important. Full frame versus crop sensor. A crop sensor is going to obviously get you cropped in, so that little bit of extra zoom some people like. I personally would rather crop after, because I feel like the image, some of the image quality is lost. And particularly you don't have as much dynamic range on a crop sensor uh, camera. So keep that in mind. Now, of course, cost is going to be higher usually on a full frame. But if you're looking for the best dynamic range, the ability to crop as much as you need to, and get, images that you can turn into, large prints if you want, keep that in mind. Focusing speed. I like mirrorless cameras for this type of photography. It's going to give you the fastest focusing speed. You're going to have lots of focusing points. And it's just going to make some of this stuff possible. If you have a typical DSLR with a mirror, then you're going to struggle a lot more. It's just not going to focus as fast. It's not going to trigger as fast. Um, on your lenses, you want to make sure that you have a good minimum focusing distance. So like part of the reason why I have the 100 to 400, I actually looked at, Sony came out with a 200 to 600 a few years ago, I think about a year or two after I bought my 100 to 400. And I was trying to decide if I should get that or add the 1.4x and the 2x teleconverter. And um, the thing that I didn't like about the 1.4 and the 2x is that you lose a stop of light with the 1.4 and you lose two stops with the 2x. Well, the big advantage that I have with the 100 to 400 is a 1 meter minimum focus distance. So I can shoot subjects that are just 3 feet away from me. And so if I put the 2X on there, I'm shooting at 800 millimeters and I don't change my minimum focus distance. So I'm shooting at 800 millimeters, subjects that are 3 to 6 feet away from me. I'm getting macro results. In fact, maybe even a little better than macro results as far as the amount of zoom. And so that was ended up being the right choice for me, especially with software that's available now. Most of you guys are familiar with Topaz that handles noise, so you can go with the higher ISO levels that you're going to have to do when you're shooting at fast shutter speed and high apertures. So for me, that made a lot more sense. And if you're wanting to get good close-up photography using a telephoto lens, you need to think about what that minimum working distance is going to be, minimum focus distance. If you're having to be 10 feet away from the subject in order to for your camera to be able to focus, then you're just not going to be able to get a good high detail close-up shot of that subject, even if you're shooting at 600 millimeters. Um, the macro versus the telephoto lens. For this, I think it really comes down to what I'm looking for compositionally and what the subject is willing to tolerate. I do try to be respectful of the subjects that I shoot, and if a subject doesn't like me getting up close to them and never allows me to get into that friendship zone, then I try to respect that and leave them alone. I may try another subject sometime later. And if it continues to be a thing that they're just incredibly skittish and don't want me messing with them, then eventually I'll that's just going to have to be a subject that I only get with the telephoto lens. Get to know the sharpest range of your lens. For most lenses, that's going to be about f8 through about f13. Usually below that or above that, you're going to be either a little bit softer or it's just not going to focus as well. Um, so the things that I like about shooting with a telephoto lens, I already kind of talked about a little bit. It gives you greater working distance. You're able to obviously to photograph subjects that are further away, particularly when you're photographing insects in flight. I always tell people start off with a telephoto lens. Don't start with the macro lens. It's exponentially harder. Is there some people you may be able to do it, and if you can, then great, more power to you. And for sure stay with it if you're able to do it right away. But for most people, it's a lot easier to start off with a telephoto lens. So start there. You're going to have more room for error. You can shoot from a little bit further away, so you're not having to worry about them getting spooked by you moving in too close. And then as you start getting more accurate, then start moving a little bit closer and eventually switch to that macro lens and start working at that up close distance. If you guys watched my last workshop, I talked a lot about shooting with flash, and in order to shoot with flash, for it to be meaningful, you have to be really close. If you're more than a couple of feet away from the subject, you're not going to be able to get enough light out of that flash for it to adequately light up the subject and really do anything meaningful for the image. Um, you need you will need good natural light if you're shooting with a telephoto lens, though. But again, those kind of things are becoming less and less important with good editing software. But still, having good light doesn't always necessarily mean strong light. Just having the right kind of light for the type of composition that you want. You may want a silhouette, and so you want it backlit or low light. So um, natural light is definitely going to let you do that. Shooting with a macro lens is going to give you that smaller working distance, but it's going to give you incredible details. You're usually going to need additional light, especially if you're going to shoot at a aperture that allows you to get a good enough depth of field to with particularly with the in-flight subjects. You don't really get to do stacking. And I don't like stacking anyway, even with stationary subjects. I find it too technical and I don't want to be a technician. I want to be an artist. As I mentioned earlier. So think about that and what you enjoy doing. I'm never the type that tells people what they should be doing with their photography, what kind of choices they should make, other than to have fun. But find what you enjoy doing and get the gear that allows you to do that. If you're going to need additional light, a speed light is going to be the best choice. Obviously, it gets to be right on your camera. And it's also going to give you the fastest flash durations. A lot of people don't often think about that especially if you're trying to freeze motion, if you're trying to freeze a flying subject, that faster flash duration, the flash becomes the thing that freezes the subject when I'm shooting up close with flash. And so having that faster speed light is going to give you at about 1/16th power, you're going to have 1/4000th to 1/5000th of a second pop of light, and that's definitely fast enough to freeze a subject. So definitely think about that. You might want to get a macro adapter for additional magnification. I use the Nisi adapters. There's several other brands out there. There's one really popular one that's the name's escaping me right now. I'm sure it'll come to me when I quit thinking about it. I did want to mention real quickly the diffuser. I'll show you guys how it looks on the camera right here. It fits right over the flash, and then the end of it goes over the end of your camera. As you guys noticed the picture, the self-portrait that a buddy of mine took of me taking a picture of the beast. So the hood of the diffuser ends up going over the subject and blocks the light as long as that subject is within that range right in there, and that's where you're going to be shooting anyway with flash. So the one thing about this diffuser, this one is, like I said, it's the AK diffuser. I do have a special. I talked to Zamir, the guy who created this, and he's got a special deal for you guys that I'll show you guys at the end if you're interested in getting one of these diffusers. He's a really great guy, but end of the day, it's a really great diffuser. I had made my own prior to getting this one, and I was always pretty happy with the light, but when I tried this, I was just really blown away by how much it amplifies the light, so it allows you to set your power a lot lower and then just diffuses it just perfectly. So you just really surround your subject with really nice light. Think of it like basically like a mini umbrella is how I always like to describe that. And oh, and by the way, this lens, this is the new Sony 70 to 200 that has half macro capabilities built in. If you put on a 2x teleconverter, it goes to full macro. I'm really enjoying this lens a lot. Sony's not paying me anything, and I don't have any discount codes for them, sorry. But I'm really enjoying the lens. I don't think it's as sharp as the 90 millimeter, but it's got a full-time DMF button, which is full-time direct macro or direct manual focus. And what that does is when you're using autofocus, a lot of times your camera starts hunting in the background, and then you can't pull it back. You end up having to focus on something close and then go back to your subject. Well, what that DMF button does, if you're a Sony shooter, it allows you to use the manual ring together with the autofocus. So if your autofocus goes to the wrong place, you can pull it back with the manual ring. And so I'm really enjoying that, especially with video. So I do, if you haven't gotten that lens and you're a Sony shooter, I do recommend trying it out. Like I said, it may not be your primary macro lens for, because I don't know that it's quite as sharp, but I like it artistically. I like photographing with it, and I like doing video with it. All right, continuing on. My techniques with telephoto. First, find the best shooting angle for light. And again, that may mean different things. It may mean you want really strong direct light on the subject. Obviously, overhead when the sun's at noon, that's not necessarily going to be your best light because it's going to be really bad contrast on the subject. Um, so, looking for the sun to be maybe at about 3 o'clock to the subject or something like that is going to give you a good surrounding light. I also like to shoot on days where it's slightly overcast so that you have nice naturally diffused light on your subjects. Find a location with good activity. that's one of the things that I feel really fortunate with my ranch. Have a really great pond with lots of activity. Those of you guys that have been there know that it's a good size where you're able to get to any part of the pond. And so trying to find something like that where you know that there's good activity and getting to know if you have the right species, there's certain species that tend to behave the best. This is a common green darner. I mentioned earlier the thornbush dasher, the blue dasher is another good one. That those three are probably my top three best for the hovering behavior. And so those um, obviously you're going to want to shoot more than just three, but you're going to want to practice a lot and to get your techniques down. And so shooting though having your favorites is a good idea so that you can get faster and faster and better and better. And when these start getting easy, then the harder subjects will also start getting easier. Um, I always say, kind of watch. They'll usually, when they're doing their territorial behavior, they're going to come back to a certain area multiple times. They'll fly away. They'll kind of triangulate. They'll go to one spot and then to a second spot, third spot, and then come back to the first spot. And sometimes a few more spots than that. But they're usually going to come back to a same spot. And as you watch that, pre-focus to an area that you know they keep coming back to, and that way your focus doesn't it can react a lot faster when they come back to that area. And as Linda herself has learned, that sometimes it takes a few tries, a few opportunities of being out there and waiting for it. But when it happens, if you've been practicing, then you're ready for it and you get to nail that shot. I remember how excited she was when she nailed her first frontal shot of a dragonfly in flight that she shared with me a couple of years ago after a couple of weeks after coming to the workshop. Um, let's see. So you pre-focus the intended distance. Choose the appropriate size of a focus spot. I always say pick as small of a focusing spot as you can, because that's going to allow your camera to be that much more precise. If you just choose the wide setting where the camera is looking for whatever, it's going to grab whatever. So you need to tell the camera what you want it to focus on. So you're going to need to start off with a larger focusing spot when you first start doing this, but as you get better and better, try to make it to that smallest spot so that you can always. I even am to the place now where I try to get it right on the eyes with that small focusing spot while it's in flight. So that should be the goal for you as you're progressing in your skills. Play with your point of view. Um, you know, it- when you first start shooting, it actually helps to have a little bit more of a downward angle if they're hovering above water, and letting that water kind of be a background, a clean background is going to make it a lot easier for your camera to focus. And so don't worry about trying to get a neat composition with some foliage and flowers in the background. Those are definitely going to distract your camera. And so I always tell people to start off with that clean background, try to get that shot first, and try to get good at getting that shot before you start complicating things with interesting backgrounds. I always set the exposure on auto, the ISO at auto, I mean, and use your exposure compensation dial to make sure that it's exposed for the subject, not for the background. Your camera is always going to try to look at the whole scene and expose for the scene. And so if the light is behind the subject, then your subject's going to be in shadow unless you crank up the exposure compensation. And so think about that as you're shooting, and make sure that, like I said, that you're exposing properly for the subject. And that some of that stuff you can always fix. I always tell people also it's better if you blow out the background, because you can fix um, overblown backgrounds easier than you can fix underexposed backgrounds. There's about 4 times as much information in the highlights as there is in the shadows, so it's easier to recover blown out highlights. Just know that factually about the way that digital sensors gather and record information. My settings with telephoto lens, I'm shooting always in manual mode, this not manual focus. I already mentioned I use autofocus, but sometimes I'll use manual focus, but primarily autofocus. Manual mode means don't use aperture priority or shutter priority because again, your camera is going to be making too many artistic choices for you about where what speed the shutter should be at, what aperture you should be at. You need to control all those things so that you're making the choices for if you're exposing for the subject and where your shutter is going to be and all those kind of things. So I always tell people get comfortable shooting in manual mode when you're shooting nature photography. Um, I'm usually starting at about f10, so I have a good depth of field. And then about 1/400th of a second to 1/2500th of a second, depending on the subject and the available light. Definitely a stationary subject. I'll even go down as low as 1/200th of a second. The in camera image stabilization is good enough these days on most cameras that you can get away with a much lower shutter and use that ISO auto as I mentioned, exposing for the subject and the selective spot focusing on the eyes. This shot right here, take a look at the shutter speed. This was shot at 1/400th of a second. And you can see it froze the wings. So they flap their wings at like I think it's if I remember correctly like 200 times per second. So it struck me, that it was definitely less than 400 times a second. And so why wouldn't 1/400th of a second freeze it? And so obviously if there's a little bit of motion, it's going to blur, but I was able to nail this shot handheld at 800 millimeters. I'm proud of this shot. Um, but I wanted to because it was extremely low light. This was captured at about 7 p.m. And the sun was already below. I was kind of down in the bowl of my pond, and so the sun was already below that. And so if I had been shooting at 1/1600th of a second, the ISO wanted to be at 25,000. And so I had to slow it all the way down to 1/400th of a second in order to bring it down to ISO 4000. But as you can see, just really got this beautiful shot with uh, a soft diffused light. On it. And like I said, I was able to freeze the subject even at 1/400th of a second. So test the boundaries of your camera's image stabilization. I've definitely with the A1, I've got a really good camera and lens combo there. So I don't it's not lost on me that helps. But get to know your camera and try it. See if you can do it. I hadn't tried it until this time. And when I was able to get those kind of results, I was like, okay, wow, this is pretty cool. Um, and I'll show you there, I circled in there so you can see that I'm not just uh making it up. And that's the actual Lightroom settings there for the shutter speed, the focal length, the aperture, and the ISO. All right, for my macro techniques, and I know I'm getting close to the end here, but I was just about done. For my macro techniques, again, early morning, looking for resting or slow moving subjects. Approach slowly and from the front. Use selective spot autofocus as you're approaching, targeting the head. I do switch to manual focus once I get close, and that way you're going to be a lot more accurate with manual focus to make sure that you're nailing it from the eyes. But as you're coming up, a lot of times you're going to be needing to hold the camera with one hand while you're moving things or while you're crawling or whatever. And so, or grabbing the stem that it's on or things like that. So, using autofocus until you get into that friendship zone, and then you can switch over to manual focus. For this one, this was actually a male desert firetail damselfly, and he was mating with a female, and but they had already actually finished mating, and she was depositing eggs in the pond. And so, as you can see, his arms are just dangling there. His tail was still attached to the back of her head the way that they connect, and so he was just hovering there in space. And so, of course, he was distracted, and I was able to get in super close because this was one that is super skittish. I had never been able to get this close when he was just perched on a stem. It wasn't until I was able to find one that, like I said, was it had just made it, and the female was depositing the eggs, that I was able to move in close enough for this shot, and it ended up being just a really cool opportunity because of the way that it looks like it's just levitating in air like that. Um, Settings, again, manual mode, you want to be in control again. Usually about F8 to F16. These days I'm usually closer to about F13. I used to shoot at about F10. With the one of the things that I did that I didn't mention earlier when I was talking about gear, the Godox V863, I upgraded to that. It does have better light output and faster recycling times than the V862. So if you've been contemplating upgrading, I do highly recommend it. Again, totally unsolicited, no discount codes or anything like that from Godox, um, but I do recommend the V863. Like I said, it definitely gets you better light output and better faster recycling times. So that's allowed me to crank up that aperture a little bit more, get more depth of field, and still get really good light from my flash and good fast recycling times. The shutter, even with in-flight, now I don't have any in-flights yet using flash with macro. I haven't been able to get quite close enough yet to really get a shot that I'm proud of with flash on a Dragonfly. I have done it with bees. If you watched my previous presentation, and like I said, we'll do that this weekend at the workshop. Conditions are good, but they should be. But at any rate, even with those, I'm shooting at about the same thing of about 1/200th of a second to start off with, and about ISO 200 and about f13, because the flash is what's going to freeze the motion. Um, and then the flash power, about 1/8 to 1/16 power, gives you plenty of light and still having good fast recycle times. So you can take multiple shots, one right after the other. Again, that selective spot autofocus as you approach, and then manual focus once you're up close. This was a subject that was basically, I found her in the water on her back, and I got her out of the water on this stick. And she ultimately ended up not never flying away, and then she died. I think she was just kind of at the end of her life. But I was able to take some good pictures. This is a female common green darner. And so as a result of being able to get these photos, I took the opportunity with her on the stick of trying some creative things with using backlight from the sun, creating that rim on the wings and just getting, a nice combination of flash and natural light there. Um, all right, closing thoughts. I always like to tell people, like I said, I'm not here to tell you how you should shoot. I'm here to tell you what I do, and hopefully these tips can help you to get better shots. I've had people in the past on Instagram tag me and say, "Hey, what do you think of this picture?" And my response is always, "What do you think of it?" If I'm not here to be anybody's critic. If there's something that you're not happy with and you want to know how to get a better result, I'm more than happy to tell you how to get the result that you want, but it needs to be your art. Don't try to have it be my art, have it be your art. And so create art, have fun, don't get too handcuffed by technical aspects. Find your style and master it, just spend enough time with the subject, spend enough time practicing the techniques to where you know that you can get out there and consistently get the shots that you want. People ask me all the time, like with my in-flight bee photography and with the dragonflies as well, how many shots do you have to take to get a good one? And it's funny, I tell people actually these days, I nail most of the shots, well over 50%, probably 75% of the shots. But that to me, I don't consider every shot that I nail to be a good shot. Some of them, it's not perfectly nailed on the eyes. Some of it's more on the shoulder. Some of them, the wings are in a bad position. I'm just not happy with the composition, and so I'm actually more critical now than I used to be. When I'd be excited just to get one in focus, and these days, I want something that's exciting compositionally, something unique, something with a cool background. a really neat wing position. So even though I may end the day with 200 or 300 shots in focus of insects in flight, I'm only going to end up narrowing it down to maybe five that I decide, okay, these are my keepers. These are the ones that I'm going to share on social media, or these are the ones that I'm going to turn into a print. So when you first start off, you're going to obviously need to spend a little bit more time um, with the just okay shots, and that's a normal part of the process. But keep working on getting better and better until you got the technique down, and then focus on just being as artistic as possible with those techniques once you have them mastered. Um, you can follow me on social media if you don't already. That's my Instagram. You can use the QR code there to go to my Instagram account. And then my Facebook, like I said, I am probably more on Facebook these days. As I had mentioned, I do a lot of artistic shows, these art festivals, and different other types of festivals like Bluebonnet festivals and things like that. And I've found that my audience for those is on Facebook more than they are on Instagram. And so I think that that's a part of what allowed me to just start naturally gravitating more towards Facebook. Linda and I were discussing, just how much Instagram has changed in the last year. It's not as fun as it used to be. And all of that, but I still want to keep a presence on there. And I actually intend, I was mentioning to her as well that, after, just kind of getting some other things in back into balance, I feel like I want to start being a little bit more on social media again. Connecting with people at these shows is starting to reinvigorate, that some of them are photographers as well, and some of them want to see, some of the neat pictures that I take that may not necessarily become an artistic print for a wall, but are still something really cool about what I'm doing in the field and what I'm finding out there. So I did mention I have a special deal on the AK diffuser. You can use that QR code to go to my page with the AK diffuser, and then if you do that, this code does expire on the 18th, so you have 10 days to use it, but you'll be able to save 10% on your very own AK diffuser if you've been thinking about getting one and haven't gotten one. I think a number of you have already gotten one, but it just really gives you phenomenal light. It can be used for, you don't have to be doing flying insects, just a stationary insect like this is going to be it's going to be even better, I think, as far or easier to really get a really cool shot and give you that beautiful light. So, like I said, feel free to utilize that if you want. And then one last thing, as I had mentioned at the very beginning, I do have a pollinator workshop coming up this Saturday. I do still have a couple more spots. So if you're interested and if you're available, there's a QR code that'll take you right to the form to find out all the information about it. And you can sign up right from that form. If you use the code happiness100, it'll knock $100 off of the price, which was the early bird pricing that I had. But like I said, I only have a couple more spots. I will be doing, as I mentioned, another workshop in June, and then I'm also going to do a Dragonfly workshop in September or October. It's a lot's going to depend on how the summer goes with drought and things like that. Last year was a really, really strange year. I've been doing this for 6, 7 years, and last year was the weirdest year as far as activity. It just wasn't good. So so far, all indications are that this is going to be a good year, and so I'm expecting that early to mid-September we should be able to do a workshop. But like I said, just stay tuned. A little closer to late mid-July, August, I'll announce a specific date for that. And when we do the Dragonfly workshop, it'll also probably include butterflies because they tend to be migrating around that time as well. A lot of mating activity is happening, and so they're really active. All right, and with that, does anybody have any questions?
I have questions, but I'm going to get you to pull up a photo where it's kind of full front. What somebody wants to know is, can you tell us all the parts of the face of a
Uh,
dragon? Do you
yes. There's the
know?
eyes, the nose, the mouth. Uh, yeah, let me go back. Let me see if
Like,
I can find one.
yeah, I was visualizing that purple
That
one.
close-up one.
Hmm.
Let me do this a different way. Let me get out of the
Yeah,
and just go
yeah, the red one.
this one here. And then let's
Sure.
that one. Um so yeah, they have compound eyes, which are the big goggles that you see. And those are I forget how many hundreds of little individual units in those compound eyes. And then they have obviously their antenna. They have what are called ocelli, which are there's if you notice that the white spot kind of in the middle that looks like a third eye, and they actually have three of those. If you look on either side, I'm trying to make sure my finger is pointing to the right place on the screen because it doesn't match up exactly with what I'm seeing here. But you'll notice I'll demonstrate kind of on my own face. So there's that third eye right in the middle, and then on either side there's like a little bump as well. And so it's got three ocelli, and the understanding for ocelli is that their main purpose is for detecting movement. And with a lot of insects, they only have one ocelli, but obviously, as you see with the dragonfly, not only do they have these gigantic 360-degree view compound eyes, but they have these three ocelli that are just really dedicated for detecting movement. So you can imagine that's why it's so difficult to approach them without them taking off, and but it allows them to see and do a lot of the things that they do. Then they have so it looks like they're smiling, and what's interesting, um, hang on, let me go back out of this mode. And so the thing that I've always found, if you shoot them from the top, um, or from a higher angle, they look serious and angry. Let me see, where's this other one? This one is a little bit of a higher angle, and I'll zoom into it. So you can see he looks more angry and serious. And so if you get that angle a little bit higher, that's always how they look. And but if you go from a little bit of a more front on or a lower angle, then they tend to look like they're smiling. What's funny is that the mouth actually opens on the bottom, down under here, where what would be right here on our as if we're looking at the face being like our face, the mouth opens down here like this. It opens up in to the sides, and it's a lot like the predator's mouth. And so yeah, does that answer the questions as far as all the different parts?
I think so. So, you said it a couple of times.
Yeah,
She.
that's a
So,
female. Yeah.
yeah. So the question is, how can you tell the difference between a male and a female, or how
Um,
could we tell it? Being
it's-
like,
right. So
you're in friendship zone. We most
I'm in
of
the
us.
friendship zone. That's right. Yeah. The females smell like flowers. The males smell like armpits. No, I'm kidding. Um, the um, the difference is, so on the tail, you can tell the difference. The males, because they grab the females, they're gonna have the I forget the what it's called, but it's a deal that allows them to be able to grab the neck of the female behind the head. Let me go to back over here to this picture, so you can see how he's able to grab her right there, and so then the female's not going to have that appendage there on the end like that, that allows her to do that. But I don't know if I've got a picture of a male. Yeah, there we go. So on this one, you can this is a male widow skimmer. Um, that's widow, not little with a wisp, with a with a lisp. And so you see how it's got the two little fork basically there at the end. that allows it to grab onto the female's back of her head, neck area. And and like I said, if you look back to the picture of the male and the female, she's not going to have that same appendage there because she's not going to be able to need to do that. Interestingly, people think, when they look at this, that the one in the back must be the male just because of how they think of sexual positions, but there that is the female that's in the back, and the male's sexual organ is actually underneath there. The sexual organ's not back there. He uses that, like I said, just almost like a hand to grab her with, and then they connect right there. Any other questions?
Got some birds and bees in here today.
That's right.
Okay, so
We're all adults.
one other question. Let me see. Oh, the question was, a couple of people asked, what do they eat? And since they're not necessarily, you don't find them, many of them on flowers, or you don't see them on flowers as regular. So they're not after nectar. I thought they were carnivore. I thought they were
They are,
carnivore.
yeah, they're big time carnivores. They eat pretty much anything that they can get their mouth onto. They'll eat other they're carnivore. What's their cannibals?
Animals.
They eat other dragonflies. And that's something I wish I would have gotten a picture or video onto this slideshow, but I know it would take me too much time to go through. I'll see if I can find something and share it on a story or something like that on Instagram here in
Yeah.
the next couple of days. But yeah, I've got video where a dragonfly has captured another one. It's literally eating its head, like it starts eating one of the eyes off, one of the compound eyes. It's like half of the head is gone. And the other dragonfly is actually still moving. It's pretty gruesome. But yeah, they'll eat pretty much anything that they can catch.
Say thank you for coming back. I mean, I know
Yeah.
that you're just here, but when we were talking about wanting to do dragonflies, I had you later in the season, later in the summer, and this kind of worked out. So
Yeah.
I think the dragonflies are starting to get out there and enjoying some sunlight. So this is a great timing on our part of
Yeah.
getting information out there, and hopefully it'll inspire people to get out and play and get a little bit of um, uh, tennis elbow from up and down with our cameras, and get our shutter finger some exercise. So
Yeah.
all right, well,
I always need a day of getting out and shooting to get my alignment correct.
mhm.
I find that some people, my wife is actually, when we first started dating, we would go out and shoot pool, and she would always kick my butt because she's just got that natural, and she's a sharpshooter with a gun as well. She had so she worked for the DA's office. She's an attorney. She worked for the DA's office, and as part of that, was able to go to the FBI training academy and did their shooting range thing where they take you through a simulation. She scored a 97. She's yeah, so don't mess with her. And she was like shooting person after person in the forehead. And I say that just to say that I'm not that kind of shot. It definitely took me some time to get really good at getting that alignment perfect. Now I've gotten good enough now to where I know what my quirks are. I tend to be a little, to a certain side, and I pick that up very quickly now, and I'm able to adjust for that. And I've gotten pretty deadly accurate now, but I still always need a day or two to just kind of get out there and get the rust out after a winter of not doing a lot of this kind of shooting.
Yeah, it takes a little bit. I was out yesterday with my camera just a little bit with the butterflies, and it's almost like I forgot how to, hold a camera. So
Mhm.
after, it took me about an hour to kind of get in sync again with them,
Yeah.
and my own, my fingers and my brain working at the same time. So All right. Well, it was great to see you again, and thank you for sharing more information. And at some point, we'll get you back and have you come up with something else that we need to learn. So, but
Awesome.
thank you for doing this for us. All
Cool.
right. Next,
Thank you for having
next.
me.
I'm sorry. I cut you off. Is there anything else?
No, I just said thank you for having me. I'm happy
Yeah.
to do it anytime.
You bet. All right. Next week, Tamron Ambassador Elise Bender will be here to present the diverse landscape. Until next time,
Awesome.
go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.